He kōna e purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
When Appelgren burst briefly into public prominence in December of 1987, he escaped from Kaitoki prison and took to the airways for 4 hours to argue his case on Auckland's talkback Radio Pacific.
It's 20 minutes past 9, Radio Pacific, the talkback.
This did not endear him to the authorities.
It was a prison escape that caught the attention of the nation, a brazen breakout, one also carefully planned to bring attention to what Ross said was a terrible injustice. But on the 21st of January 1988, Ross, the daring fugitive, the unlikely radio star, had run out of luck. Instead, it's Ross, the convicted murderer, in the dock of the Auckland District Court, facing the charge of escaping custody.
Running up before the judge, I knew that I would be wasting my time with explanations, being angry with everything, especially with myself for being a fool, for prevaricating so long, for getting drunk and getting caught.
The justice system he'd embarrassed had him right where it wanted him.
The judge asked me if I had anything to say, and I replied, yes, there's nothing you can do to me. I'm doing life. So do what you want. The judge interpreted this as total disrespect for the courts, and maybe he was right. To me, it was a simple statement of fact. What the judicial system had already done to me was worse than anything it could now impose. I was serving a life sentence for a crime I didn't commit, yet no amount of pleading, explanations, whatever, would make any difference now.
Ross's appeal had failed, his escape had failed, and now the judge tacked another 9 months onto his sentence. But in this story, you guessed it, Ross's journey is not over yet.
He's unearthed fresh evidence that supports his claim to be innocent.
You're listening to Nark, an RNZ investigative podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wesley-Smith. This is episode 11, The Petition.
Parry looks like a nuclear plant, with low concrete walls set into the ground like bunkers.
In early 1988, Ross was once again an inmate of Pāremoremo prison.
As you go through all the gates and grills, this underground bunker feeling persists. The concrete walls and the echoing clanging of the grills makes you feel as though you're entombed.
As Ross describes it, he was effectively locked down in the basement cellar of the justice system.
The closest I can get to a description is that this is, and feels like, a dead zone.
Even in that dead zone, Ross worked to get his legal fight spluttering back to life. He reconnected with Rosemary Wilson, his friend and ardent supporter. Together, they'd mount a pincer attack on the prosecution case. Ross researching on the inside, Rosemary making calls on the outside. But they needed help.
The idea of a lawyer doing anything for nothing was something that had never occurred to me. I think a comment that he made once to me was that he was interested and felt that there was an injustice.
So in early 1988, Rosemary contacted a promising young Auckland lawyer called Bob Hesketh.
I don't know, does that sum it up? Or?
It does. I must admit, when I first was approached by Rosemary, following a recommendation from a solicitor friend of hers, to look at this matter,
Hesketh politely declined an interview for this podcast, but back in May 1989, he joined Rosemary and host Tim Bickerstaff on that Radio Pacific program about Ross's case. Hesketh explained how the year before, he'd started on this journey that would occupy the next 7 years of his life.
I had some knowledge of it because I know Mary Beth Sharp very well, and also who appeared at the trial, Jeff Wells. And I well remember when this trial was proceeding in 1985, and young at the bar in those days, and I can recall them both expressing their concern about matters and their alarm that he had been found guilty, and it sparked my interest then, and as I say, I had some knowledge of it.
Hesketh became Ross's close friend, his advocate in the courtroom and court of public opinion. With a thick mop of brown hair, big rimmed glasses and a hopeful smile, Hesketh had a young Hugh Grant look to him. Though well respected, with just 6 years as a lawyer under his belt, Ross's case was a big one for Hesketh to take on. But what he lacked in experience, he made up for in determination and belief.
Yes, I do have an opinion, and that opinion is, I think, unbending, and that is that this man is innocent.
It was Hesketh who was going to open a bold new line of attack. He vowed to help Ross petition the Governor-General to re-examine his conviction, something Ross discovered could be done after his on-the-run appearance on Radio Pacific. Back then, anyone convicted in New Zealand whose appeal had failed could ask the Governor-General for a pardon or to refer their case back to court. Officially, it's called an application for the exercise of the royal prerogative of mercy made under Section 406 of the Crimes Act. I know, it's a mouthful. In practice, the decision is made by the Justice Minister and their advisors, which the Governor-General signs off. But petitions are so rarely granted, it's akin to a moonshot. Between 1995 and 2019, 166 petitions were filed, but only 15, or around 9%, were referred back to court. To get Ross's across the line, countless hours of work and research were required, which Bob Hesketh mostly did for free.
Sounds naive, I suppose, but that's just the way it is.
I'll try and explain this as simply as I can. Basically, an applicant like Ross has to clear 2 hurdles. He has to convince the Justice Minister and his advisors there's enough new evidence to show a miscarriage of justice may have taken place. If successful, the Minister will refer the case to the Court of Appeal, the second hurdle, where it's decided if in fact a miscarriage of justice has occurred. An exacting process and Ross's final chance at proving his innocence. But this appeal wasn't like the ones Ross filed earlier, based only on legal arguments with decisions handed down by judges. This time it was effectively in the hands of the Justice Minister, a politician, a person whose decision could be swayed, in theory at least, by public opinion. So the question was, would the public get behind Ross?
He's no unblemished man, is he? I mean, in 1984, his probation report said he'd spent 12 of the previous 17 years in jail.
That's right.
On the face of it.
In a 1990 interview with RNZ's Maggie Barry, Bob Hesketh discussed his client's character.
He's not a person with a history of violence. He's not a person given to violence. All those who know him, and I include amongst that prison officers who've got to know him over a long period of time, all say that he doesn't fit the profile of someone who would kill. He's been described as a likeable rogue, and I think the rogue probably refers to this list of convictions for burglary and so forth and so on.
Mind you, getting back to it, he is a criminal. He has a past record of 4 escapes, as well as the armed robbery and the burglaries. Do you think that...
Clearly, it was going to be an uphill battle to get the public and the Justice Minister on side. Ross needed something new, something that cast doubt on his conviction. He needed a smoking gun, or 3. On the 17th of March 1988, out of nowhere, that evidence arrived. Peter Jenkinson, the detective who'd put him away, finally released an avalanche of crucial new documents to Ross. Documents the police and the Crown previously claimed didn't exist. Jenkinson hadn't done this willingly. Ross and his lawyers said Jenkinson's hand was forced by the Ombudsman, who Ross had complained to about police withholding information from him. The document dump lit up the Crown case like the 4th of July. The initial bombshell were the records of Ernie's original interviews with police, revealed for the first time.
Your main concern was the fact that two witnesses made statements to the police which contradicted their evidence in court.
Here's Hesketh speaking with Radio Pacific's Tim Bickerstaff in 1989, describing how much Ernie's story changed. And just a note, in this clip, Hesketh refers to Ernie as X.
Now, the murder occurred around about 7 a.m. The witness X was interviewed by the police that same day about what he either saw or didn't see, and he said in his interview with the police that he saw nothing. And then he was interviewed by a different police officer the following day, and he gave substantially the same account to the police officer then, although he added one or two, I think, minor matters. He was then, I think on about the 10th of January, I could be wrong about that date, but he was then taken away from Mount Eden Prison by the police.
So here I should point out that we now know what Hesketh didn't during this interview. That Ernie was taken to the Auckland Central Police Station on January the 10th, 1985, to that meeting where police said they considered him either a witness or a suspect. The meeting where police failed to take any notes, and the details of which have only been made public in this podcast. For Hesketh, who was none the wiser about all this, the gap between statements and Ernie's about face was still super suspicious.
No record of any other statements made by him exists until the 22nd of February, when he made another statement which completely and utterly contradicted what he told the police on the 6th and the 7th of January, and basically put Ross Appelgren in it, if I can put it that way. And then again at trial, at depositions and then at trial, he substantially gave the same account.
In a nutshell, the newly released documents revealed that 6 weeks before Ernie had said he'd seen everything, he had told police he'd seen nothing, not a thing. For the first time, Ross and his legal team learned that Ernie had done a 180. For Hesketh, both versions couldn't be true, and he argued it was for the jury to determine which one to believe. It wasn't for the police or prosecutors to only disclose the version they preferred. Ross, languishing at Parry, felt a rush of hope.
I'm not a lawyer, but even I knew this was dynamite. The police went to the appeal court and handed over the statement made 6 weeks after the murder. They were telling those judges there were no other conflicting statements. They might have believed that, but I had the proof that wasn't true in my hands.
And as a good 80s salesman would say, but wait, there's more. There was Aaron's police statement dated the day after Darcy's attack. Remember, Aaron was Ernie's cellmate, the only person in the kitchen he felt he could trust. To police, Aaron disclosed what Ernie told him shortly after Darcy was found.
That he'd said to his cellmate that he'd seen the deceased faint and that he thought he was having him on.
Hesketh said this squared with Ernie's initial statement to police made the same day.
And when he saw the deceased, he thought he was having an epileptic fit of some sort.
No mention on either occasion of a brutal bashing. And the final bombshell was Gordon's first police statement. Gordon's the guy who was doing time for a serious assault. He's also the guy Ernie said had deliberately blocked the prison guard's view so Ross could commit the murder. And he's the one Aaron and Ernie both said had threatened them to keep their mouths shut. At trial, Gordon told the jury why he thought Ross killed Darcy.
He said, "I'm definitely not going to let him get away with it. I'm going to deal to him."
He pointed the finger directly at Ross, said Ross had confessed to him. But during his first police interview, when Gordon was asked if he knew if anyone had it in for Darcy, he replied,
"I don't know. I've got nothing to say to you. I didn't see nothing."
Of course, the jury heard none of this.
Yeah, why wasn't it presented? Well, the defence didn't have any knowledge of it at the time. Simple as that. It wasn't until, bless him, Ross Appelgren himself through tenacity and applications under the Official Information Act. It wasn't until he was given access to those statements some many months after his appeal that the real impact was revealed.
Ross's trial lawyer, Mary Beth Sharp, who appeared on the same show, told Tim Bickerstaff she was also stunned.
I fought long and hard, day and night, literally for many, many months, to get hold of all the statements that were made by the various persons concerned. And one can only imagine that these statements did eventually surface long after the appeal and so the hubbub had died down, because the powers that be considered that perhaps they couldn't do any damage.
Well, why weren't they cooperative with you, in your opinion?
Well, I can only think, and it's something that I have considered for many years now, that for whatever reason, perhaps political pressure, because it is so unseemly to have a murder within a prison environment, perhaps in some ways worse than a murder in the streets, so to speak, that the police were determined to have a culprit and to have that culprit convicted and put away.
Both Sharp and Hesketh believed the jury's verdict could have been different. After all, Ross's defence had centred on his claim Ernie and Gordon were simply lying.
And it was made very clear during the trial that it was the testimony of those witnesses which would decide this man's guilt or innocence. And as I say, here we have a significant inroad into their credibility.
It's important to point out, Gordon and Ernie later said they hadn't changed their stories. Rather, they only felt able to open up to police once they were promised protection. I've had an actor read from an email Ernie sent me after I'd tracked him down.
I didn't want to give any indication at all, whatsoever, that I knew what had happened. I wanted the whole thing to go. I was in such a vulnerable position with the immense pressure at the time.
Given the snitches get stitches world they were living in, it's perhaps understandable Ernie and Gordon didn't assist police during those initial interviews inside Mount Eden. But Ross and Hesketh didn't buy any of that for a second. So in July 1988, they started Ross's fight back.
And of course the very crux of the Section 406 petition is that there is now compelling evidence which reveals conclusively, if you like, that people who gave evidence at the trial said things at the trial which were vastly inconsistent with what they had earlier told the police. And that was information which ought to have been put before the jury.
In support of his petition, Ross filed an affidavit saying,
I believe that the statements which have come to hand since my trial and unsuccessful appeal had been deliberately withheld, first from my defence counsel and secondly from myself, because they were inconsistent with the Crown's contention that I killed Darcy Tahira.
The petition was sent off to Justice Minister Geoffrey Palmer and his officials.
I don't know that I can describe those months. The first 2 or 3 passed reasonably quickly, or as quickly as time passes in prison, which isn't exactly fast. I was absolutely convinced that the petition would be successful, and I was full of hope. I had everything going for me. All I had to do was wait.
What Ross didn't know at the time, something he wouldn't discover until years later, was that the man considering his petition, Geoffrey Palmer, had, according to police records, already played a role in his case. I'm referring to that meeting Ernie had with a Justice Department official called Charles Hood before the first trial, the one police had made notes of, which journalist Keith Davies earlier read aloud.
The record of that meeting states Mr. Hood indicated that the Minister of Justice had instructed him to reassure the subject that he would be well looked after.
Fast forward to 1988, and now the same people who'd helped encourage Ernie to give evidence were the ones determining Ross's petition, which argued Ernie's evidence was all a lie. Given all that, could they really be impartial? I decided the best person to check with would be the man himself, Sir Geoffrey Palmer. You'll remember my executive producer Tim Watkin called him for a quick interview, but Sir Geoffrey couldn't remember the case.
I have no recollection of anything relating to it. It's 40 years ago.
Having considered the documents we sent him, though, Sir Geoffrey said he didn't think he needed to have recused himself from considering Ross's petition, saying, and I quote, "Since I have no recollection of Charles Hood or my contact with him, I doubt very much that recusal was necessary. You are assuming I was conflicted. I do not accept that." Back in 1988, any hopes Ross had for a quick decision on his petition dissolved as 1989 arrived without any resolution. All the while, the ribbing Ross got from other inmates just continued.
I was asked almost every day why I was still here, told that there was a Rolls at the front door with a chauffeur asking for me, and all the other idiot jokes that help keep people sane in a crazy place.
Ross put pen to paper and wrote to the Justice Department.
Dear Sir, I'm writing this to you to ask you if it's possible to pass on to Mr. Palmer my concern over the time period my 406 application is taking. I know, sir, that these things take time. I also know that it's not a matter that can be taken lightly, but I would like to point out that the strain it is putting on myself and family is quite extreme and would appreciate any help in speeding up this process. Thank you for your time. Yours sincerely, Ross Appelgren.
By May of 1989, still with no answer, Hesketh had had enough. He went public, telling the media, "Justice delayed is justice denied."
The silence from the Minister of Justice's office since July of last year has been deafening. I wrote to him in early March of this year, expressing, I think, quite strong words of concern as to why it's taken so long. He wrote back to me within a couple of weeks, first apologising for the delay, acknowledging its unacceptability, and again, since then, the silence has been deafening.
Well, why did it happen in this case then?
Well, the reason that we have been given is that the petition raised complex issues which needed to be closely considered. But the petition was prepared largely by Ross himself between about March and July of 1988. Ross has no formal training in the law. He was able to get it together in a short period of time. I would have thought that members of the Ministry of Justice's staff would have no difficulty in coming to grips with the issues raised.
The fact that you can't get a reply from, we couldn't either, from Geoffrey Palmer, the Minister of Justice, have you upset him or criticised him before? Or?
Well, no, I'm generally a fairly mild-mannered sort of chap, and I have never taken this kind of public stand before on behalf of a client. This is the first time.
Well, why this one?
Because this case sticks out to me like a sore thumb as involving a grave injustice.
People inside, and I include both inmates and officers, helped a lot. The petition under Section 406 was still unusual enough to attract interest. I had a copy of the petition in my cell, and those who read it seemed impressed with the arguments. In some ways, I think that my case became a sort of yardstick. Most crims have little time for the justice system, and time again I was told, "Man, if you get this one, I'll start believing it's possible." A few warned me against getting my hopes too high. They pointed out the number of watertight cases that had been turned down at the Court of Appeal. They argued that my past history was against me. I went on hoping. Yep, in a sense, the longer time went on, the more it seemed that they were taking the petition seriously. I told myself that if they were going to turn it down, they would have done it by now.
Ross, Bob Hesketh and Rosemary Wilson banged the drum loudly enough that Geoffrey Palmer finally felt obliged to respond. He went on Radio Pacific for what has to be said was a robust cross-examination by host Pam Corkery. Now, apologies, the audio's not the best, and it is several minutes long, but believe me, it's worth the listen.
Mr. Palmer, why has this petition taken so long to be acted on?
Well, we have to make sure that the advice we're going to tender to the Governor-General about it is right. It's a prerogative of mercy matter. It's calling for a criminal conviction that's been duly entered after proper due process of law, after a jury and a judge have heard it and all the appeals have been disposed of. You can't go around interfering with convictions just on a casual basis. You have to have very good and solid reasons for doing so, and my department hasn't yet finished the complex investigations that are required to advise me on it.
10 months seems an awful long time to look at two statements by witnesses that are obviously contradictory.
That may seem the case to the lay mind, but the difficulty is that this is an extraordinary procedure. No one has any right to a procedure like this. It is entirely discretionary. And when people have been properly tried in accordance with the law, we don't give up setting their convictions a high priority.
You say it's not a right, it's a discretionary thing. I thought it would be a basic human right if there's some pivotal evidence that hasn't been heard. Surely someone languishing in jail.
It is a question of a person who has been properly convicted by a court and a jury and sentenced by a judge. The prerogative of mercy, which the Governor-General has, can undo that if certain circumstances are satisfied. To do so is extraordinary, unusual, and very, very infrequent.
But serious doubt's been thrown on the properly aspect, which you bring up.
Serious doubt, in terms of the news media aspect, is not the same question of as undoing a legal conviction. And
no, I wasn't meaning the media.
Discussion of these things is very unlikely to advance Mr. Appelgren's cause, I must tell you.
Well, it's moving as fast as a glacier at the moment. It probably couldn't go any slower while he's waiting. I'm not saying about media throwing doubt on it. I'm saying that here evidence that's entirely contradictory has come to light. Can't you move faster?
No doubt I will get advice on it when the matter has been properly analysed, but it is not a simple thing.
When it's someone's liberty at stake, do you not personally think 10 months is an awful long time?
Their liberty is not at stake. They've been convicted by process of law. They are in jail perfectly lawfully, and the only way they can get out is if the Governor-General exercises the prerogative of mercy.
But if there's sufficient doubt thrown on the evidence of two of the key witnesses, I don't know. I mean, as you say, layperson, you point out.
Yes.
It seems an awful long time.
I'm not in the business of upsetting convictions on some casual basis.
Well, we'll get back to you then when we hear some more on this. Thank you very much for your time.
Right.
Justice Minister Geoffrey Palmer.
Rosemary Wilson continued to pile on the public pressure. She again wrote to the Dominion, this time approaching its Sunday Times newspaper, asking them to investigate Ross's case.
I was a features writer with sort of a very free brief, really.
Rosemary's letter found the desk of journalist Robert Mannion.
So Rosemary was entirely my introduction to the case. I really wasn't on my radar. I wasn't aware of it at all.
No.
But I remember thinking, God, this looks like quite an interesting story to dig into.
Robert contacted Rosemary and began his own years-long investigation.
And then when I met Ross, I liked him. There was nothing to, there was no... I certainly had no alarm bells. Oh, I don't like this guy, or he seems a bit sus or anything. He seemed a perfectly easy sort of guy to connect with.
Robert's first piece on Ross's conviction was an in-depth feature story in May 1989, headlined, "He's a Rogue, but is he a Killer?" He took readers through the facts of the case and the statements kept from Ross and his lawyers that revealed Ernie and Gordon's conflicting stories.
From an outsider's point of view, that just doesn't feel fair. Evidence shouldn't be withheld at a trial. Even if it's legally okay to withhold it, it doesn't feel right.
Robert's reporting and Bob Hesketh's media appearances lit a fire under the justice officials considering Ross's petition. Within weeks, the minister had acted on advice and given his recommendation to the Governor-General, who released his decision. All the anticipation, all the hope, the highs of new evidence discovered came crashing down to earth. The petition was declined. Justice officials didn't think the differences in Ernie and Gordon's statements would have changed the jury's verdict. It fell to Rosemary Wilson to break the news to Ross. Here's her account of that meeting from the memoir she co-authored with him.
Ross knew from the moment he saw me that I brought bad news. I couldn't hide the tears, and maybe that was a good thing, because I couldn't speak either. Typically, he was more concerned about my despair than his own. We had said for months that he should not hold out too much hope, but we'd all been quietly confident that they could not possibly turn such a strong application down. As I made my way out to the car park an hour or so later, I met a prison officer coming on duty. As he walked past me, looking straight ahead, he said quietly, "The bastards. If anyone ever deserved to walk, it was Roscoe."
Ross later revealed in a letter to Rosemary how much he was hurting.
If you hadn't kept saying that this was not the end, it would have been. Deep down, I believed it was. All my dreams just fell apart. I worked through self-pity, confusion, hopelessness, and an absolute conviction that keeping on was a total waste of time.
Bob Hesketh went on Television New Zealand to express his frustration as well.
I felt, and I still feel, that a miscarriage of justice in the widest possible sense occurred, and that Ross was entitled to the benefit of that. And I believe that the Governor-General was incorrectly advised, yes.
Several weeks later, just as hope began to fade and Hesketh turned his attention to other cases, his secretary walks into his office and hands him a note. Bob called the person back. It was a woman. They had a brief conversation.
Before we start, Bob, I'm told that there's been a further development.
And later that day, Bob shared the latest twist in this tale with Tim Bickerstaff live on Radio Pacific.
Yes, good evening, Tim. Well, this morning I received a message to ring a person, and when I telephoned that person, I was informed by them that they were a member of the jury that presided over Ross's case back in 1985. This person told me that they and others on the jury had quite considerable disquiet about the verdict of guilty.
So who is this juror? Well, we've actually met her already.
I always had that nagging doubt that I'd done the wrong thing.
Our lines are open. If there's anybody out there...
It's not every day someone phones Radio Talkback with information that might help free a convicted murderer. Then again, the Ross Appelgren case is one with a lot of firsts.
If there's anybody out there, particularly a juror, who would like to give us a call.
We're back to that 1989 Radio Pacific Talkback program hosted by Tim Bickerstaff.
We would like to know, and you can be totally anonymous about it, what went on in that jury room.
Amazingly, about an hour and a half into the show, the same juror who spoke briefly to Bob called into the Talkback show.
Well, we have, I believe, the juror on. Joe, is it?
Yes.
Joe, were you talking to Bob Hesketh this morning?
Yes, I was.
Can you tell us? You were on the jury at the time.
Yes.
In your own words, what happened?
From day one, certain members of the jury had him guilty.
Now, for legal reasons, we're not going to play the parts of this which describe the jury deliberations at Ross's trial. That's because, strictly speaking, it's against the law to interview jurors about how they reached their verdicts. Radio Pacific were apparently never pinged for it, but we've decided not to take the risk and to respect the law of the land.
Has it worried you since?
Yes. I've thought a lot about Ross.
If you've been listening to this juror and thought, hey, I recognise that voice, well, that's because that juror is Julie Appelgren, or Julie Whittaker, as she was then. Yep, the woman Ross Appelgren later married was on the jury that convicted him of murder.
There we go. Okay. I'm going to play something for you. See if you can recognise this.
When I met Julie, she'd never heard a recording of that phone call 35 years ago.
Well, we have, I believe, the juror. Joe, is it?
I didn't know about any subsequent appeal he had because I went to live in Australia, and it was only after I came back because my mum had died.
It was only then, 4 years after the trial finished, that Julie learned what had happened to Ross.
Pacific Tonight with Tim Bickerstaff.
Stephen, welcome back to the program. I'd just like to quote an article from...
I heard the introduction about someone who was fighting for a new trial, their appeal, and before they even said it, I knew it would be Ross. I just had that gut feeling, and I phoned in and I said to whoever was on the end of the phone, I was on the jury, do you want to talk to me? Or, yeah, I was straight on air. Immediately.
It was an extraordinary thing to do for a woman who, before the trial, led an ordinary existence.
Was it the first time you'd been on a jury?
Yes, never been on it before.
How did you feel when you were actually selected?
I did take it seriously. I was there to do a job.
Can you recall what your first impressions were of Ross?
I don't know. He was the one on trial and, nicely dressed, sitting there and writing a lot, making a lot of notes, obviously, talking to his counsel. Yeah, but I didn't think too much about anything, really.
It wasn't like you looked at him and thought, I'm going to marry that guy.
No, I didn't. No, who would have ever thought of that ending?
There were so many lies, all those prisoners, and I went home at the end of the week completely and utterly drained. And I know I burst into tears when I walked in the door.
Here's Julie on Radio Pacific again.
How do you feel about it now?
Well, I just feel I owe it to him to come forward. And I'm just sorry it's so late.
Bob Hesketh, sitting in the studio listening to Julie that evening, was left almost speechless with all the details coming out live on air.
I'm stunned by what I've just heard, and that makes it very difficult for me to formulate any question. There are a number of questions I would like to ask her ultimately, but I'm just so stunned by what she said.
Mary Beth Sharp was also moved by what she'd just heard.
I'm very grateful to that lady that she rang you, Bob, because I think that must lift Ross's spirit quite a lot, actually. It means that what he was saying during that trial and the emphasis that Jeff and I were putting on the reactions and the evidence of certain of those Crown witnesses was not all for naught.
Now, this next point is one that I really want to make clear. Julie wasn't one of those lovesick people you see on American TV, randomly fascinated with an imprisoned murderer. This was different. This was just a woman who stepped out from the anonymity of the jury room to apologise to the man she felt she'd wrongfully convicted.
Well, after I'd been on air and I'd spoken to Bob, I thought maybe I'll brave it and maybe I could go to the prison and meet Ross.
Did you feel you owed it to him to kind of meet with him?
Well, yeah, because I'd already started that ball rolling with phoning in to the radio. And
were you a bit anxious about what he might be like when you met him? Like, do you think were you worried he might be like, why did you find him guilty?
I suppose I was a little apprehensive, but no, he didn't blame me at all. He was quite the gentleman.
In a 1996 interview, Ross recalled that first conversation with Julie.
I enjoyed talking with her. I didn't say, it's a bit bloody late, darling. Why didn't you say that at the time? There was no instant love or anything. We just both sat down and we found each other easy to talk to. And I sent her another pass to ask if she'd like to come back, and she did.
Julie prepared an affidavit describing the concerns she'd shared on the radio. She hoped Ross could use it in his ongoing effort to convince the then Justice Minister Geoffrey Palmer to reopen his case.
Did that come as a relief to be able to do that?
Oh, I was very, very happy to do it. Yeah, I guess it was relief, yeah.
Remember journalist Robert Mannion? He'd continued to cover Ross's petition and ended up interviewing Julie in June 1989.
She seemed very genuine and had obviously found the whole jury experience quite bruising.
Robert reported Julie's worry that Ernie and Gordon's first police statements were withheld from her and the other jurors.
She thought, well, if I'd known that, that would have given me a bit more confidence in arguing back against the dominant view. This was the fact that these guys had changed their story.
How can you convict someone when you don't know who to believe?
Did you feel like the court was asking the jurors essentially to be lie detectors? And did you feel that was a fair expectation?
No, I don't. To me, it was just nagging feelings that something's not right here. Something's not right. So many different witnesses and so many different stories that it just didn't feel right.
After Julie signed her affidavit, Bob Hesketh sent it off to the Justice Minister. Even then, Hesketh knew legally its usefulness was marginal.
As a matter of law, it can have no effect. The Court of Appeal have basically said that it's not appropriate to, if you like, go behind the jury's verdict, go into the jury room and decide whether the manner in which they arrived at their verdict was fair, appropriate or otherwise.
But this was one of those throw the kitchen sink at it situations.
It's one thing to say as a matter of law it can have no effect, but I think when one's considering a petition under Section 406 of the Crimes Act, other matters can sometimes be taken into account, and this may well be one such other matter.
But again, it was a no from the minister. Ross, sitting behind bars in Parry, was back to the drawing board, racking his brain for one last push. Remember, it was 1988 before Ross finally got Ernie and Gordon's first police statements. But that was only half the story. He still didn't know who made the crucial decision to withhold the statements at his trial. Only then could Ross establish why that occurred. So Ross asked the police. A detective wrote back to him in June 1989 and said, quote, "The conduct of the prosecution case rests with the Crown solicitor." In other words, the trial prosecutor, Stuart Grieve. Journalist Robert Mannion jumped on the revelation.
Stu Grieve had shut me down, which was the smart tactic for him. And I thought, this gives me a basis to go back.
Robert told me that for months he'd chased Grieve for a comment on Ross's case.
That was the basis for confronting Stuart Grieve and getting him to talk was, the cops say they didn't do it. Like they say, you did it. You're the bastard. Because he did not welcome.
In my book, what Robert did was pretty remarkable. It was, and still is, incredibly rare for the media in New Zealand to quiz prosecutors about their conduct. Mostly, that's because it's usually the police that handle journalists' questions about prosecutions. But not this time.
It was a Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon. I guess I deliberately took a relatively confrontational approach. I remember feeling surprised and happy that he engaged with the questions. I sort of certainly stressed rather than legal talk. I just said, is this fair? You know, the guy's sitting in jail and there was this evidence that could have helped him. Is it fair that it's not shared?
Grieve told Robert that according to the law in force when Ross's trial took place, he didn't have to disclose Ernie and Gordon's first police statements because they weren't materially inconsistent with their trial testimony. That was strongly disputed by Ross's trial lawyer Mary Beth Sharp, who said there were huge inconsistencies. Ernie and Gordon originally told police they had no information about Darcy's murder. But Grieve told Robert he simply didn't agree.
And then there's a quote here, "You seem to assume that I agree there was unfair play. I don't accept that at all. I don't accept that even if she, meaning Mary Beth Sharp, had the material, would have made any difference to her state of knowledge." And I thought that was kind of, well, I'm pretty sure Mary Beth herself said yes, it would.
Here's Mary Beth Sharp saying exactly that on the TVNZ Frontline programme in 1989.
The credibility of Crown witnesses who were giving evidence to the effect that Appelgren had committed the homicide was absolutely essential. The witnesses that gave evidence against Appelgren had to be believed, otherwise a verdict of guilty could not be found by the jury.
Robert's reporting gave Ross yet one more card to play. He and Bob Hesketh decided to challenge the denial of the first petition.
Defence team challenged the assumptions that underlay the denial of that petition and presented a fresh one some 2 or 3 months later.
One strengthened by the discovery of yet more evidence, or rather old evidence, that was new for Ross and his defence team. This time, it was Ernie's second anonymous note written the day after the murder. And you might remember, this is the note which included 5 crucial words.
I never saw it done.
At Ross's trial, Mary Beth Sharp knew this note existed, but she couldn't get the Crown to hand it over. In the years after his conviction, Ross repeatedly asked to see it, but police refused. Then, rather oddly, in August 1989, an unnamed detective did disclose it, not to Ross or his lawyers, but to a TV journalist.
I've been requesting information under the Official Information Act for years, and even the Ombudsman couldn't get it for me. Yet people from the media were given the information quite freely. They were given evidence which was denied me. It was also denied to the jury at my trial and to the Court of Appeal.
Ross's legal team said the fact that Ernie's note was delivered anonymously was important. They argued the notes were his most honest account of what happened in the kitchen when Darcy was killed. There was no fear of being labelled as a narc, because no one could know where the information was coming from. If Ernie had actually seen the murder take place, there was no reason to say otherwise.
Why do you think the police didn't act on this note if it sounds so impressive?
Oh, well, my theory on that is this, and it's probably a little cynical, but shortly before the Tahira murder, there was another murder in Palermo, I think 2 or 3 years earlier.
Here's Hesketh talking to Maggie Barry in that 1989 RNZ interview we heard earlier.
And there was an enormous amount of pressure on the police to catch that particular murderer. They arrested and charged someone with that murder, and he was subsequently acquitted.
He's talking about Cedric James, who was accused of murdering Keith Hall in 1979.
I believe that perhaps there was some feeling that they ought to really secure a conviction in the Appelgren case.
The police, though, are not in the habit of just sort of grabbing anybody and charging them just so that they can solve a case. Do you believe what you've just said is entirely fair comment, or perhaps speaks of the fact that you are defending Ross Appelgren?
Well, I think what's important is that the witness upon whose evidence the Crown relied to sheet home the conviction had earlier said something on 2 occasions to the police which differed very materially from what he said at his trial.
In October 1989, Hesketh filed Ross's second petition to the Governor-General. It referenced Ernie's note and the Crown's decision to withhold the witness statements. Ross was likely encouraged that his latest petition would be considered by a new Justice Minister. Bill Jeffries succeeded Geoffrey Palmer when Palmer became Prime Minister in August 1989. Jeffries replied to Ross's petition in December of that year, and it was something of an early Christmas present.
I propose to refer the application to independent counsel for investigation and advice. Counsel will be asked to conduct a full investigation of your client's submissions to His Excellency, including a review of the investigation of the first petition.
Lawyer Paul Tim QC was appointed to review the case, another thing Ross was optimistic about. Tim was an experienced barrister, well respected among inmates for his tenacity defending Arthur Allen Thomas. Thomas had been convicted twice for the 1970 murders of Harvey and Jeanette Crew and served 9 years before being released with a royal pardon. Turned out Ross's optimism was well placed. In Tim's June 1990 report to the Justice Minister, he said it was clear Ernie's first police statements and his handwritten note conflicted with his trial evidence.
This witness cannot have been truthful on all occasions. The narrative he has supplied may be truthful at one time, but it must be untruthful at others. Which is true and which is false was never put to the test before the jury, nor before the Court of Appeal.
And the Crown's failure to disclose this, Tim said, robbed Ross's lawyers of the crucial opportunity to discredit Ernie by questioning him about his conflicting statements and exploring why his story changed so dramatically. Tim's conclusion was clear. Ross deserved another day in court.
Jeffries announcing the case would receive a rare rehearing in the Court of Appeal.
Ross's case, dead in the water for months, suddenly had wind back in its sails. To spearhead his appeal, alongside Bob Hesketh, Ross engaged experienced barrister Simon Lockhart QC. Here's Hesketh with RNZ's Maggie Barry again shortly after the minister's announcement.
I mean, apart from obviously his feelings that he's innocent, what's kept him going for all these years?
He's a remarkably patient person, as is obvious from the time that he's waited for this to happen. He's been a victim, I suppose, or involved in our justice system and those who dispense justice for many, many years, and he has a basic, deep faith in our justice system, in the fact that truth will ultimately prevail.
I can't explain where my faith in the justice system came from. It had always been there. It's a weird situation, being convicted of a crime you didn't commit, especially for a man with, to say the least, a coloured past. I knew the system, and the system knew me. Over the years of doing time, I had accepted my sentences because I had done the crime I was convicted for. As they say within the rules, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. But to face life, or for that matter any sentence, knowing that you are not guilty of any crime, is one of the hardest tests I've ever had to face.
Ross had now somehow clambered over the first hurdle, but the second and higher barrier still stood before him. The Court of Appeal. Again. This time, would the court find in his favour or not? Coming up on the next episode of Nark. Thanks for listening to Nark, hosted and written by me, Mike Wesley-Smith. I'm also extremely grateful to everyone who spoke with me for this podcast, especially Suzanne Young and Ross Appelgren. And if anyone listening has more information about this case, I'd be keen to hear from you. Send an email to nark@rnz.co.nz. Follow and listen to Nark wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've enjoyed it, use the share button to recommend it to a friend. Some more quick thank yous to Ngā Taonga and Mediaworks for some of the archival audio, and to the voice actors who helped bring some of the characters in this episode to life. Craig Genty, Jack Sargent, Nigel Collins, Bonnie Harrison, Phil Vine, and Jonty Dine. The RNZ producers who worked on this episode were Liz Garton, William Ray, Duncan Smith, and Justin Gregory. The audio engineer was William Saunders. Thanks also to Steve Burridge and Jeremy Ansell for the studio wrangling, and to Kevin Golding for opening the doors to me every week after hours. Graphics were designed by Amrita Marks, and the shorthand page, where you can find more information on this story, was made by Hing-Yi Kong. Check it out at rnz.co.nz/nark. Tim Watkin is RNZ's Executive Editor Audio, and Brianna Uritich-Gregg is the Production Coordinator. You can find more of RNZ's great podcasts, like Thrift, on the RNZ website, rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Check them out. Bye for now.